Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, good. This time we're heading down south to Athens, Georgia.
Athens. Always an interesting place.
Yeah, definitely. But today's deep dive, it's not about like football or anything fun like that.
Right.
This one is about a pretty serious arrest.
Sounds intriguing. Who are we looking at?
A guy named Jose Antonio Ibarra.
Ibarra. Okay. And what do we know about this arrest?
So we've got this stack of legal documents, and honestly, it's a lot to take in.
I bet.
But that's what we're here for, right? To dig into all the details.
Absolutely. That's what these deep dives are all about.
Right. So let's start at the beginning. The arrest report.
Always a good place to start.
Exactly. It's dated February 23rd, 2024, and it says that Ibarra was arrested at his apartment.
Okay. Makes sense. Where was this apartment?
At 2085 South Millage Avenue, apartment D125.
Got it. So far, pretty standard stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, the address and that's all routine.
Right.
But then you get to the charges.
And that's where things get interesting. What are we talking about here?
Murder.
Murder. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And not just one count of murder.
No.
No. We've got 2 counts of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder.
Hold on. 2 counts each. That's a lot.
It is. But wait, there's more.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, they also added 2 counts of murder, 2nd degree.
Wow. So we're already at 6 murder charges.
6, and that's not all. They also charged him with aggravated assault, aggravated battery, kidnapping.
Kidnapping, too. This is getting serious.
And it doesn't stop there. We've also got false imprisonment, obstructing, hindering a 911 call.
Wow, they really threw everything at him, didn't they?
And to top it all off, concealing the death of another.
Wow. Okay, so right off the bat, it seems like the prosecution thinks they have a pretty solid case.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of charges. And there's another thing. On the arrest report, they're all marked completed.
Completed? What does that mean?
It means that at the time of Ibarra's arrest, the police believed he'd actually done all of these things. Like, they weren't just investigating. They thought they had enough to arrest him for all of it.
Okay, so we're not dealing with just accusations here. The police believe he committed these crimes. But how did they get here? What led to all of these charges?
That's where it gets interesting. So along with the arrest report, we also have all these arrest warrants.
Arrest warrants, right.
Yeah, and affidavits, lots of them.
I'm assuming each charge has its own set of documents.
Exactly. So we've got this whole paper trail that lays out the details of the case against Ibarra.
Fascinating. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, I think the best place to start is with the warrant for malice murder.
Makes sense. That's got to be one of the most serious charges.
Definitely. This warrant was issued on February 22nd, 2024.
The day before the arrest.
Right. And it says that the alleged murder happened at 110 Lake Herrick Drive.
Okay. Does that address mean anything to you?
Not really.
That's the University of Georgia intramural fields.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about a crime on a college campus.
That's right.
Okay, that adds a whole other layer to this. So who was the victim?
Her name was Laken Riley.
And the warrant says that Ibarra, with malice aforethought, caused her death.
Yes, with malice aforethought, either express or implied, caused the death of Riley. Those are the exact words.
Malice aforethought, what does that actually mean?
It basically means that the prosecution thinks Ibarra intended to kill Riley, or at least that his actions were so reckless that her death was a likely outcome.
Got it. So we've got this alleged murder on a college campus. This is already sounding pretty bad, but I have a feeling it gets worse, right? What about all those other warrants?
Well, let's just say they made a pretty disturbing picture of what might have happened that night.
Okay, so like, for example, the warrant for felony murder. What does that tell us?
So that one says that Ibarra caused Riley's death while he was committing another felony.
So he was doing something else illegal, and Riley was killed because of it.
That's what the prosecution seems to be arguing, yes.
Wow. Okay, then what about the kidnapping charge?
So according to the warrant for kidnapping, Ibarra allegedly took Riley from those intramural fields against her will and then held her captive.
Kidnapped her from the fields. Oh man, this is just awful.
It is, and it gets worse. There's a warrant for false imprisonment, too.
False imprisonment, what does that mean exactly?
It basically means that Ibarra allegedly held Riley against her will, kept her from leaving.
So it's like another layer of that kidnapping charge.
Right, exactly. They seem to be building on each other, all these charges.
It's like this whole terrifying sequence of events. Oh, and then there's that aggravated assault charge. What did that warrant say?
That one alleges that Ibarra assaulted Riley with the intent to murder her.
So on top of everything else, they're saying he actually tried to kill her.
That's what the warrant alleges. And there's a warrant for aggravated battery, too.
What was that one about?
This one accuses Ibarra of seriously injuring Riley, specifically endangering her skull.
Endangering her skull? God, this is just horrible. I mean, we're not just talking about legal terms here. This was a real person, a young woman who was hurt.
It is a truly awful situation,
Hmm.
and it's important to remember that these are still allegations. Ibarra is innocent until proven guilty.
Right, of course. But the evidence does seem pretty strong, doesn't it?
It does. The prosecution seems to be making a case that this was not just some random act of violence.
No, it sounds like something much more deliberate.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the kidnapping, assault, and battery, but there's also the charge about the 911 call.
Right. Obstructing, hindering a 911 call.
Yeah. What does the warrant say about that?
Well, it alleges that Ibarra actually prevented someone from calling for help.
Seriously. Like, he stopped someone from making a 911 call.
That's what the warrant says. They're saying he intentionally kept Riley from getting help.
Wow, that's chilling. And then there's that final charge. Concealing the death of another. What's that about?
That warrant alleges that Ibarra tried to hide Riley's body.
Tried to hide her body. Oh, man. So we've got all these charges, and they all seem to point to a really disturbing set of events.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
But what about Ibarra? What are his options here? Can he get out on bail or something?
That's where the order-setting bail document comes in.
Yep.
This is basically the document that lays out the bond amounts and any conditions for release.
Okay, and what does it say about Ibarra?
Well, first of all, for several of the charges, there's no bond allowed.
No bond. So he's stuck in jail.
Yeah, for the murder charges, the aggravated assault, the kidnapping, he's being held without bond.
Wow, they're not taking any chances with him.
No, they're not.
Uh-huh.
And there's another condition in the document.
Oh, what's that?
Ibarra can't drink alcohol or use drugs while he's waiting for his trial.
So they're really cracking down on him.
It sounds like it. They want to make sure he doesn't pose any further risk to the community.
Okay, so we've got this really complicated case with all these serious charges, and Ibarra is being held without bond. This is shaping up to be a major legal battle, isn't it?
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And things are only going to get more intense as this case moves forward.
Speaking of which, where does it go from here?
Well, according to the order-setting bail document, this case is headed to Superior Court.
Superior Court. What does that mean for Ibarra?
It means things are about to get a whole lot more serious.
Oh.
Superior Court is where the big legal guns come out. It's a whole different level of strategy and maneuvering.
I see. So what exactly will happen in Superior Court? What can we expect?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what we'll be diving into next time.
Sounds good. I'm already hooked. Can't wait to see where this goes.
Yeah, Superior Court. It's like, moving from the minor leagues to the World Series. This is where it all goes down.
Yeah, exactly. And with stakes this high, you can bet this is going to be a long, complicated process.
Same.
But before we jump too far ahead, let's go back to the evidence for a minute.
Okay.
We talked about the warrants, but what about the affidavit itself for the malice murder charge?
Right. The affidavit. That's where Sergeant Raboud lays out all the reasons why she thinks Ibarra committed malice murder.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like the heart of the case, right?
It is, yeah. It's where the narrative starts to come together. It's not just a list of, facts, It's Sergeant Raboud trying to connect the dots and show how the evidence points to Ibarra.
Okay, so walk me through it. What kind of story does this affidavit tell?
Okay, well, first of all,
Yeah.
it puts Ibarra at the University of Georgia intramural fields on the night of the alleged crime.
Right. Okay.
Remember, that's the same place where Riley was last seen alive.
Right, of course. So they're connecting Ibarra to the crime scene right from the start.
Exactly. And then it goes on to talk about witness testimonies.
Yeah.
People who might have seen something that night. And then there's the malleaver, physical evidence they collected at the scene.
Okay, so what kind of evidence are we talking about? What did they find?
Well, the affidavit mentions DNA evidence that links Ibarra to the scene.
DNA, okay.
Yeah. And then there were signs of a struggle, indicating that Riley didn't just give up without a fight.
Wow, okay. Anything else?
Yeah, actually. Maybe the most damning thing, they found potential murder weapons in Ibarra's possession.
Murder weapons. Wow, that's pretty incriminating stuff.
It is. Of course, we have to remember that this is all alleged. At this point,
Yeah.
Ibarra's lawyer is going to try to challenge this evidence,
Huh.
Poke holes in the prosecution's theory. But it's a pretty strong starting point for their case.
This is just, it's all so unsettling. I keep thinking about Riley and her family,
Yeah.
what they must be going through. This happened on a college campus, a place that's supposed to be safe. It's like every parent's worst nightmare.
It's a tragedy, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
And the location, that's definitely going to play a big role
Yeah.
in this case going forward.
How so? What do you mean?
Well, think about it. This wasn't just a crime that happened in some, dark alley somewhere. This was on a university campus, a place that's supposed to be a haven for learning and growth. That fact alone is going to amplify the public outcry. Put a lot of pressure on the justice system to deliver a really decisive verdict.
I can see that. Yeah, people are going to be demanding answers, demanding justice for Riley.
Exactly. And the university itself, they're going to be under a microscope. People are going to be asking questions about their security measures. How well are they really protecting their students? This case could even lead to changes, nationwide.
Yeah.
In campus safety policies.
Wow. Yeah. The ripple effects of this case, they're going to be huge.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that, even in places that seem safe, terrible things can still happen.
Absolutely. But let's go back to the legal documents for a minute.
Okay.
We've talked about the malice murder affidavit, but remember there were all those other charges.
Right. Each one with its own set of supporting documents.
Right, exactly. It's like each piece of the puzzle adds another layer to the story.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
For instance, the affidavit for kidnapping, that would go into detail.
Oh.
About Riley being taken from those intramural fields, right? It would present the evidence that shows she was taken against her will. Maybe witness statements or signs of a struggle, maybe even security camera footage.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the false imprisonment affidavit? What kind of information would be in that one?
That one would probably focus on the specific things that Ibarra allegedly did to keep Riley from leaving. Did he lock her in a room? Did he threaten her? Anything that supports that claim, that he intentionally kept her from being free to go.
So it's really a meticulous process, isn't it, building a case like this? I mean, it's like stacking bricks one on top of the other until you've got this solid wall of evidence.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the prosecution, they're trying to build a wall that's impossible to break down.
Right.
They need to convince the jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ibarra is guilty of every single charge.
But what about Ibarra's side of the story? Does he have any legal options at this point? I mean, it sounds like the prosecution has a really strong case.
Of course he has options. He has the right to a lawyer, and his lawyer is going to be working hard to poke holes in the prosecution's case, looking for inconsistencies, challenging the evidence, presenting alternative explanations, for what happened that night.
So it's kind of a battle of legal strategies, both sides trying to convince the jury that they're right.
That's the heart of our legal system, yeah.
Right.
It's an adversarial process. Both sides present their case, and the jury decides. It's designed to be fair, but it's definitely a high-stakes game, especially in a case like this.
Speaking of high stakes, let's go back to that order-setting bail document for a second.
Okay.
No bond for those serious charges means Ibarra is stuck behind bars until his trial. That's got to be tough.
It is. It really shows you how seriously the court is taking this. They clearly see him as a potential threat.
Yeah, and remember, they also added that condition about no alcohol or drugs. They're not messing around.
Nope. They want to make absolutely sure that he doesn't pose any further risk while he's waiting for trial.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly complex case with all these charges, and Ibarra is being held without bond. So what's next? What happens now that the case is going to Superior Court?
This is where the real legal maneuvering begins.
Yeah.
Both sides will be gathering more evidence, interviewing more witnesses, filing motions, just preparing their arguments for trial.
It sounds like it's going to be a long process.
It will be. Could take months, even years to play out.
Wow. Okay. Well, it sounds like we're in for a long ride. This case is definitely going to be a roller coaster. But even with all the legal stuff, it's important to remember, at the center of all this is a young woman who lost her life.
You're absolutely right. We can't forget that. While the lawyers are fighting it out in court, we have to remember Laken Riley and the impact her loss has had on her loved ones, on the entire community.
Absolutely. Her story deserves to be heard, and her memory deserves to be honored. So as we move forward with this, I think it's important to ask ourselves, what can we learn from this? How can we as individuals, as a community, work towards a future where tragedies like this are less likely to happen?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, this deep dive has taken us through a lot. The charges, the evidence, the legal strategies, the potential impact. But this isn't just some abstract legal case. This is a real-life tragedy with devastating consequences.
You're right. It's so easy to get caught up in all the legal details and the big picture stuff, but we can't forget that a young woman lost her life.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine you're on the jury for this case. You've heard all the evidence. You've seen the arguments from both sides. What would it take for you to decide whether Ibarra is guilty or innocent? What kind of evidence would you need? What kind of doubts would you have?
Those are really good questions to think about because at the end of the day, justice isn't just about finding the truth. It's also about making sure the process is fair, even in a case as complex and emotional as this one.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so compelling, right? It's a glimpse into how our justice system works, a reminder that even when we're dealing with fair, a terrible tragedy, the pursuit of truth and fairness, that has to come first.
It's hard to even imagine what the University of Georgia community must be going through right now.
I know, it's just a murder on campus like this. It just completely shatters any sense of safety that a college is supposed to have.
Absolutely. This is going to leave a mark. Students, faculty, staff, people who live in the area, everyone's going to be on edge, wondering if it could happen again.
And with a case this big, this high profile, it's going to be all over the news. People are going to be debating everything. The evidence, the legal strategies, what the outcome might be. It's almost like the whole community is on trial, right alongside Ibarra.
That's a really interesting point. You know, these kinds of cases, they often become a focal point for bigger conversations about society. This one could spark debates about violence against women, the responsibility of universities to keep their students safe, even the role of the media in all of this.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, for sure. But even with all that, all of the legal stuff, the media attention, we can't lose sight of the human cost of this whole thing.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the complexities, the big picture. But we can't forget that. At the heart of this, there's a young woman who lost her life, Laken Riley.
Her story needs to be heard, and her memory needs to be honored. As we move forward, I think it's important to ask ourselves, what can we learn from this? How can we as individuals, as a community, try to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening?
That's a crucial question. We've gone through a lot in this deep dive. All the charges, the evidence, the legal strategies, the impact on the community. But this isn't just some case in a textbook. This is a real tragedy with real consequences.
You're right, and it's easy to get lost in all the legal details and the big picture stuff. But at the end of the day, a young woman lost her life, and that's what matters.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. Imagine you're on the jury, you've heard all the evidence, seen the arguments from both sides. What would it take for you to decide if Ibarra is guilty or not? What kind of evidence would you need to see? What kind of doubts would you have?
Those are really powerful questions. Because in the end, justice isn't just about finding the truth. It's also about making sure the process is fair, no matter how difficult the case is.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
We get to see how the justice system works. We're reminded that even when faced with a terrible tragedy, we have to keep searching for the truth. And we have to make sure things are fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. But this case, it's definitely one to keep an eye on. We'll be following it closely, and we'll keep you updated. In the meantime, stay safe out there, everyone.